All right, let's jump right in. We're going to tackle one of the most famous stories ever told, the Book of Genesis. But we're going to look at it through a lens that might just flip everything you thought you knew on its head.
You know the classic story, right? God creates the world, Adam and Eve mess up, there's this tragic fall, and God feels kind of distant. But what if that's not the real story? What if for centuries we've been missing the point entirely?
So, we're going to explore a unique perspective here, the one held by Latter-day Saints. For them, Genesis isn't this sad historical account of failure. No, it's something way more optimistic. It's a blueprint, a symbolic map for the soul's journey to, believe it or not, become divine.
And here's where it gets really interesting. This whole journey? It actually starts before Genesis 1:1. It begins with a radical rejection of an idea that's been central to Christian thought for ages.
Okay, so for a long time, the standard belief has been something called creatio ex nihilo. It's a fancy Latin phrase, but it just means creation out of nothing. The idea is that God, this being of pure spirit, just, poof, created the entire universe out of a total absolute void. Well, this other framework completely throws that out the window. It says no, God didn't create everything from nothing. Instead of being a magician pulling a rabbit out of a hat or, a universe out of a void, God is more like a master architect. He's an organizer, taking pre-existing eternal materials and bringing order and beauty to them. Joseph Smith put it this way: the basic building blocks of the universe and even our own spirits have always existed. They're eternal, just like God. And this is huge. Why? Because it means that matter, the physical stuff of the world, isn't some corrupt bad thing. It's the raw material of glory itself.
Okay, so with that foundation in mind, let's turn to probably the most famous story in Genesis, the fall of Adam and Eve. Except in this view, it's not a tragedy at all. It's reframed as a necessary and even fortunate step forward.
The whole reinterpretation really comes down to this one big question. When Eve chose to eat the fruit, was that a terrible sin, a catastrophic mistake, or was it a deliberate act of wisdom, a choice she made to get the whole human project off the ground?
So you've got these two trees, right? They represent this incredible choice. On one hand, the tree of life offers a kind of perfect, unchanging immortality, safe but static. On the other hand, the tree of knowledge is the doorway to mortality, to learning through experience. The Bible even says Eve saw it was desirable to make one wise. So, from this perspective, it wasn't an original sin that ruined everything. It was a courageous choice that opened the door for all of us to experience life, with all its joys and sorrows, and actually progress.
And the symbolism just gets richer from there. After they make the choice, what's the first thing Adam and Eve do? They try to cover themselves with fig leaves. Think of that as humanity's own flimsy attempt to fix things. But it's not enough. So then God steps in and gives them coats of skins. Now this is a powerful symbol. Where do skins come from? An animal had to be sacrificed. It's a direct pointer to the covering offered by the atonement of Christ. It's this beautiful shift from our own inadequate efforts to God's powerful, sufficient grace.
So we're seeing these divine patterns emerge. And that brings us to our next big idea. What if we read the entire book of Genesis, not as a history book, but as a kind of temple text?
The idea here is that the stories, the garden, the flood, the lives of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they aren't just things that happened a long time ago. They are symbolic rituals. They're like scripts that lay out the path for every single person's journey back to God.
Okay, let's look at Noah's Ark, for example. When you put it side by side with the tabernacle or the temple, the parallels are just, wow, they're striking. Both were designed by God. Both have a three-part structure. And get this, the Hebrew word for the pitch that sealed the ark is kafar. That's the root word for Kippur, as in Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. So the ark isn't just a boat, it's basically a floating temple, a sacred space that preserves life from the chaos of the flood, all through a divine, atoning covering.
And you see this pattern again with Jacob. His life story can be read as a personal temple journey. Remember when he sleeps on that stone? That's like the temple's foundation. The ladder he dreams of, reaching to heaven, that's the path of covenants that connects us to God. And that famous scene where he wrestles with a divine being, that's interpreted as a symbolic embrace at the temple veil, where he proves his worthiness and receives a new name, Israel, which means one who prevails with God.
So this whole idea of a path of ascent brings us to a man named Enoch. Now, in the Bible, he's a pretty minor figure, gets a quick mention. But in restored scripture, his story is huge, and it reveals one of the most profound, game-changing ideas in this whole framework.
See, in Enoch's story, salvation isn't just about me and Jesus. It becomes a group project. The goal is to build a community called Zion, a people who are totally unified, of one heart and one mind. And Enoch is so successful at this that his entire city is taken up into heaven together. I mean, think about that.
But the most stunning part of Enoch's vision, the part that really changes everything, is what he sees about God. Enoch looks down on all the wickedness of the world, and he expects to see, what? A distant, angry God? But that's not what he finds. He finds God weeping, and he's so shocked he has to ask why.
And just like that, this vision completely shatters the old idea of a distant, unemotional, philosophical God. Instead, you get a deeply personal, empathetic, weeping Father who is so invested in our lives that our choices cause him pain. And that sorrow isn't weakness. It's the ultimate proof of his infinite love.
Okay, so let's pull all these threads together. What does this all mean? Well, when you see it this way, Genesis stops being a linear story about the past. It becomes an eternal, repeating story. A personal blueprint for you, for me, for every soul.
This whole worldview is really built on three core ideas, sometimes called the three pillars of eternity. First, the creation, God organizing eternal matter. Second, the fall, not a mistake, but a necessary step for us to learn and grow. And third, the atonement, the divine rescue plan, symbolized by those coats of skins that was in place before the world even began to make sure we could find our way back home.
And that leads to this really powerful final thought. Maybe the Garden of Eden isn't some long-lost paradise we can never get back to. Maybe the garden has been internalized. Maybe it's become the temple, that personal, sacred path of covenants that each of us can walk to return to God.
Which, of course, leaves us with one last big question to think about. If an ancient text like Genesis can really be a map for the soul, what's the final destination?